part of also what you do professionally is developing leaders.
Yeah.
Talk about that, because there seems to be a leadership crisis in the West of people that aren't sure, who to follow, what a leader actually is, and how does that intersect with your book and, our desire to fight for liberty in Christ.
Yeah, so I started a leadership development firm about 14 years ago, trained and practiced law for 5 years, owner-operator of different businesses over a decade, and then I found this industry, if you will. And so I used to build businesses, and now I build into the leaders who build businesses, because leaders cast a long shadow. And that shadow is either a positive impact or a negative impact. And the leaders that I work with, I only work with successful leaders. I don't pick them, they pick me. If you don't care about your people, then you're not hiring an executive coach or a leadership development expert to help you improve your leadership. They almost to a person say, I fear I'm becoming the leader that I swore I would never be. Because bad leadership leaves a significant imprint on us. And if we don't know how to actually be a good leader, we will just continue that generational impact from bad leadership.
So when you deal with leaders, what are the characteristics that define a good leader versus a not so good leader?
Yeah, so Collins in his book Good to Great sort of imprinted on all of us a couple of decades ago. And the number one thing that he says, a level 5 leader, is humility. So think about a captain of industry who's raising his hand or her hand to say, you know what, I need a coach. So Harvard Business Review did a survey of the Fortune 500 CEOs that utilized a coach, and it was only about 50%. And they reported a 7 to 41x return. And when they took all the qualitative data and they quantified it, they were able to say, gosh, the leader, like I said, casts a long shadow. When the top leader is focusing on raising their leadership lid, the entire organization benefits. So if you start with humility to say, hey, I need some assistance. These are the same people who are hiring fitness trainers and nutritionists. I mean, they're trying to optimize for their maximum. And so I would say that's the number one trait. And then the second is that they care about their people. They genuinely have care and compassion for the people that they work with, that they do their leadership in and through.
Who do you believe that leadership, you're born a leader or that it is developed?
That is such a great question. So I believe that there are some natural born leaders, but the majority of us are developed leaders. We're trained leaders. In fact, I'm betting my entire career on the fact that leaders can be built, that they can be trained, because there's an entire science to leadership. And leadership really is just influence. You either have functional leadership or positional. So have you ever worked at an environment where the front desk person has more influence than almost anybody else in the organization? They're a leader, because they are able to utilize their role to influence others. So leadership isn't this high-minded thing. It's basically your ability to understand your influence and use it for good.
So when you try to replicate other leaders, what is the 1, 2, or 3? I'm sure you talk about this in the book, of the standard operating procedure to try to do that?
Yeah, so we've got a 5-part leadership development framework, and we call it the confident leader. If you're 70% confident, which sounds like a pretty high percentage, you're 70% confident, you're 30% doubtful. And doubt changes your performance level every single time. So the 3 things, if I were to pull out of our 5-part framework, is you've got to have a vision. So think about a leader that isn't able to communicate where they are going or where they're taking the team. I mean, this is playing out right now.
Without a vision, people perish.
Yeah, without vision, people perish. And write the vision plain on tablet so that he who runs may read it. So this
Second Chronicles,
Habakkuk 2:2, right? Or Habakkuk, as my son calls it. And then the second is identity. So you're on the team because of your strengths. So many leaders are focusing on their deficiencies, and they have this idea that you can make your weakness your greatest strength. You can't do that. And so
Where does that come from?
I have no idea.
It's like some sort of weird self-help thing.
Well, I think it's the enemy speaking to us, which is this is why you're not good, and we want to be able to solve for that. And yet, you're not on the team because of your weaknesses. You're on the team because of your strengths. And this is why we work on teams when we have the complement of strengths. And then the third piece, so if we have vision and then we have identity, would be purpose, which is the why. Why, Charlie, are you doing this job that causes you to, in this moment in time, work 23 hours a day? What is your why? Because
to save Western civilization.
There you go. Only a very small, stakes.
As abstract as one can get.
Well, and think about Viktor Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning.
One of my favorite books. Yeah.
30 million copies sold. He, bases that on Nietzsche, who says, he who has a why can bear almost any how. Mm-hmm. So how you have to march through the next 33 days might be very challenging, but you're armed with your why. I mean, Simon Sinek has made an empire on answering this age-old question, why? Start with why. And it's very powerful. So vision, identity, and why would be three pieces.
From your perspective, just generally, and I know this is one of the reasons you wrote the book, why is it that so many young people are lacking a why?
That's a great question. I think that if I were to summarize it, I think everybody else has been telling them what their why is up to this point, and they haven't actually had to think about it for themselves. And if everything is served up for them and their parents or other people are answering that question for them, it's like, wait a minute, now I'm in the real world perhaps. Who's going to answer that question for me? That's why anybody that is dissatisfied with their life either doesn't have the answer to the question why, or somebody has answered that for them. So you're either going to have somebody else define your why, or you're going to stand on your own ground and say, this is why I'm doing this.
And if a Christian is lacking a why, that's a problem, because you should have an ultimate why as a Christian, correct?
Yeah, I mean, the grand why is to glorify God.
Yes.
And then the calling, which is based on how you're uniquely wired, that's your individual unique why.
And you're in the book and in your work, you help people develop that.
Yeah, I mean, it's central. I mean, your why is your intrinsic motivation for everything that you do, because sometimes we're lazy and we just don't want to do it. So what is that drive? What is that motivation that otherwise gets us through those challenging times? I mean, Peter in the book hits a pretty significant wall and wrote it in such a way that it allows people to say, wow, that's me. And when you hit that brick wall, are you going to crumble, or are you going to move through that?